There are several dangers inherent with the use of fossil fuels. In episode 3, we briefly looked at why pollution and the human health cost might be a big reason why Elon decided he wanted to focus on renewable energy. In this episode, we will discuss another, even more fundamental reason why renewables are absolutely necessary. Fossil fuels are finite.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
So if fossil fuels are finite, why aren't more people concerned about switching to renewable energy faster? Well, so far, it seems to be mainly because of prevailing economics. Fossil fuels are still relatively cheap. The infrastructure to use them is in place, and we have enough to last a few hundred more years. The attitude amongst many, including some industry leaders and politicians, is fossil fuels are fine and well. So what's the rush? Elon, on the other hand, is most definitely in a rush. In fact, everything he does is done as fast as he can move it along. And why might that be the case when it comes to renewable energy? My own opinion on this matter is that Elon is taking into consideration several factors. In episode 3, we covered that one of Elon's objectives is to reduce the environmental impact of fossil fuel use. Today, in episode 4, I wanted to discuss another reason, this one a more human phenomenon. Scarcity creates conflict. Now, I'm going out on a limb here because I have not found any comments directly by Elon discussing his thoughts on fossil fuels and their relationship with war. I'm ascribing to him motivations that are largely unconfirmed, but nevertheless, I feel they are consistent with his character and actions so far. The history of war and human conflict is basically about the desire to obtain someone else's resources. In the past, it was arable land, gold, spices, slaves, furs, and other tradable commodities that made the owners wealthy. These days, the most valuable natural resources tend to be of the mineral variety, like petroleum and rare earth minerals. And this is only a problem when they are on someone else's land and not yours. There are other reasons why nations go to war, but I think we can agree that scarcity is a huge factor. And how much war has been directly attributable to scarcity of fossil fuels? Let's take a look at a few examples. When we think of World War II, we typically think of Hitler, the Holocaust, and Japanese imperialism. Not much attention is paid to the role that oil played in that conflict, but it bears mentioning. In August of 1941, as the world's countries continued to take sides in the growing war, the U.S. declared an oil embargo against Japan. The American oil embargo caused a crisis in Japan. Reliant on the U.S. for 80% of its oil, the Japanese were forced to decide between withdrawing from China, negotiating an end to the conflict, or going to war to obtain the needed resources elsewhere. Japan, of course, chose war, and went on to seize oil fields in the Dutch East Indies and British Southeast Asia. Hitler, for his part, knew that his expansionist plans required secure oil supply lines too. The German attempt to defeat the Soviet Union in a single blitzkrieg campaign had failed in the summer of 1941. By June 1942, the depleted German armies were only strong enough to mount an offensive in just one sector of the vast Russian front. Hitler concentrated his best divisions in South Russia to drive on the rich oil fields of the Caucasus. There is no consensus, but historians estimate that between 40 to over 80 million people around the world died in World War II, the bloodiest war ever known. And make no mistake, although Germany and Japan lost the war, oil was important to the winners as well as the losers. The Iran-Iraq War erupted in 1980, the result of a combination of factors such as sectarian tensions and territorial disputes that included oil fields. During the war, oil production of the other side also became a target for each of these countries as they attacked each other's oil tankers and oil facilities. The two countries finally signed a formal peace after 10 long years in 1990. The number of deaths is estimated at 500,000 to over 1 million. Though the stated reasons for invading Iraq in 2003 did not include oil, the United States nevertheless made sure to secure Iraq's rich oil fields. Though the capture of the country itself only took a matter of weeks, hostilities continued for years. The fall of the Hussein regime and the resulting instability sparked a prolonged civil war. As late as 2023, some American troops are still there, protecting strategic bases. The estimates vary widely, but the number of American and mostly Iraqi casualties of this war range from several 100,000 to over 1 million. This is not to say that wars do not happen for other reasons. They do. But it should be clear that natural resources are a major reason for conflict, and thus for people dying. In Episode 3, we talked about how all the emerging nations want to join the industrialized nations as advanced economies, and how it will take a lot of fossil fuels to achieve that goal. Well, there's a curious thing that happens when national GDPs rise, living standards improve, and people get wealthier. People want to be more comfortable, and are no longer as willing to suffer minor privations. When it's cold, they want to turn on instant heat. When it's hot, they require air conditioning to make it 72 degrees Fahrenheit. They want more cars and are less willing to walk or take the bus somewhere. Basically, improved standards of living are generally accompanied by more energy use, or in a fossil fuel world, a bigger carbon footprint. Well, what happens to the geopolitical situation when everyone has industrialized? What will fossil fuel prices be like after everyone's appetite for them has gone through the roof? What is the logical result when you have finite resources and theoretically limitless human wants? We have already seen examples of what people and governments are willing to do to get what they really want. Morality, honor, and civility all go out the window if they stand in the way of something people think they have to have. And remember, we're still only talking about energy here. Call it a flaw of human nature or whatever you will, but history clearly indicates this is a very real problem. Now, I haven't heard Elon talk much about human nature in any interviews, and that's why I haven't included any clips of him doing so. But I personally think that when Elon formulated his strategy long ago, he was taking human nature into account. As I mentioned in Episode 2, he was focused on areas where he felt that he could make an impact, and these included things in the human environment like the internet, renewable energy, and space, but not the human heart. I find it interesting, in fact, that whenever he is interviewed about the many ways in which he is changing the world, he never mentions how he is trying to change who people essentially are. And does Elon know about the connection between scarcity and conflict? As someone who is widely known to be very well read on a broad range of subjects, including, yes, history, I'll assume he is no doubt very aware of how countries have fought over resources, particularly oil in the modern era. How could he not be? Furthermore, he was recently drawn into the Ukraine-Russia conflict because Starlink is providing crucial internet access for Ukraine, and he has had numerous talks with U.S. military officials. More recently, he was even accused by U.S. government officials of sabotaging Ukraine's war efforts, and this despite his open desires to help people, including in Ukraine. And so, I think it's safe to assume that war is a very real thing to Elon, something that he takes seriously. Again, I don't have quotes to back me up on this, but I really do think that reducing human conflict is one of his goals. In fact, I'm rather surprised that Elon has not openly commented more on the connection between fossil fuel scarcity and war. Instead, he tends to focus on how putting fossil fuel emissions into the atmosphere is a terrible experiment. Why is this the case? Is it because talk of war is too closely related to politics, which may be too sensitive for someone in his position to publicly discuss? Is he trying to avoid giving his enemies another reason to take him down? And he certainly has enemies, especially these days. The short answer is, I don't know. And so I'll just end with this. It's definitely a leap on my part, but I'm guessing that first principles thinking probably led him to conclude that it was easier to change humanity's physical circumstances than it was to change human nature. In my opinion, Elon knows that scarcity of any kind brings out the worst in human nature and leads directly to war. Therefore, as a self-professed fan of humanity, one of Elon's objectives in weaning the world off of finite resources was to prevent scarcity-related conflict. And he would accomplish this objective by creating renewable abundance.